Hello, this is Joe. I'm joined today by Jerry and Pete, and also by Charlotte. Our producer is here, no longer hiding in the back room. She's on as a co-host today. So this is Charlotte Pierce of Pierce Press, Jerry Michalski of the Open Global Mind Project, and Pete Kaminski of the Open Global Mind Project. So maybe the first question is, are you guys from the same neighborhood? Because I know you would go way back. Are you from? Do you know each other from like
same ancestral countries?
So same ancestral country, yeah.
Shared,
and I've been doing some ancestry.com work, and there are a couple of Kaminskis in my family tree someplace, but we haven't sort of melded minds on that.
Okay.
Hey,
so you're not from the same. You're not from the same like neighborhood growing up. When did you meet each other?
I think it was about 25 years ago in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. But
that's my same story. And I'm sticking to it.
Hey, Joe, do you want to do a little station identification?
Right. Okay. Station identification. So we are getting to know Pete and Jerry and Charlotte. So this is the Peeragogy podcast, Peeragogy in Action podcast, episode number 7. The possibilities of an open global mind. So usually these stick to about 30 minutes, a few questions for our panelists, a bit of discussion. If there's messages coming in, which I saw already some drifting in, so that's fun on the live stream.
Yeah, Charles Blast is there from Zurich, I think. Yeah.
Another, clearly another stakeholder in Open Global Mind. But as you see here, I put Leo from France. So we got the
that's right.
European countries in the house. So I put this time zone map on the cover because it's global. That's representing the global. But maybe would you both love to say a little bit about these other words, the open and the mind? What are these other words? What is open global mind? Maybe we should go Jerry, then Pete, if you can say a few words about it, just to say like haiku length verse, what is open global mind to you?
The elevator speech.
Thanks, Joe. So partly it's clearly meant to talk about open-mindedness. Like, what does it take to be open-minded to other people, to other opinions, things of that nature. And then a piece of it is about sort of the mind and how it works and how we represent things. And a big stimulus for this thing even existing is the fact that I've been using mind mapping software for a very long time, for about as long as I've known Pete, I think. For 23 years, I've been using a particular application called The Brain. And I'll be screen sharing my brain in a little bit. But I'm trying also to open up a connected global mind map of what we know, and it doesn't have to be this software. In fact, we would like to be able to blend different kinds of software so that we can express what we've seen, what we believe, what we hope will happen, all those kinds of things, and tell those stories together and create some sort of collective intelligence.
Okay, and I think that was a slightly maybe more of a sonnet than a haiku, but that's okay. There's a lot to say about it. How about you, Pete? Is this because I feel like I know that there's a matter of meetings as well. So like it's a matter of community and people getting together online as well. So what is your experience of Open Global Mind? Maybe that's like another good way to describe it. Bring us there.
It's a good question, Joe. And one of the core parts of Open Global Mind is right now they're on Thursday. We have Thursday morning, afternoon, evening calls, depending on where you are in the globe. And I've described them as kind of a Coreverie. Jerry's got a real gentle and effective way of kind of bringing people out and supporting them in conversation. And so it's a lively conversation about lots of different topics that are interesting to many of the people. And a common experience is during the whole call, people are saying, oh, and that's a great idea, and that's a great idea, and that's a great idea. So they're all scribbling, we're all scribbling furiously and chatting into our chat system so that we can capture some of it. It feels also like church, kind of like a Quaker meeting, maybe, something where it's what I've also called it dream energy. It's a a recharging time for all of us to come together. So that's maybe like half of it, or maybe sometimes 80% of OGM. But there's another part of it, which is working on things together and separately, and figuring out how different sovereign individuals and maybe small sovereign organizations can federate together and cooperate and communicate and work towards a better world.
Charlotte flashed up a great kind of these two visual metaphors, which we had discussed before, of white blood cells and a mycelial organism. In this case, it was below a given plant, but I guess you know that these plants communicate with each other through their root networks and the associated fungus that grows on the root networks. So as I understand it, that to me feels like, because I've come along to at least some of the meetings, that to me feels like a good metaphor, because it's not just the community as well. It's kind of a community of communities. And I think what Jerry was saying about the communities creating a global map, I mean, this is a lot to wrap our minds around, right? So even in this call, there's a lot to wrap our minds around. Charlotte has been to one as a newcomer to the thing. That's one of our patterns. So Charlotte, what are some of the things you noticed as a newcomer in the Open Global Mind meeting that you went to?
Yeah, there's a lot of okay. I can just drop off. There was a lot of respect for people just talking that you don't get in a lot of situations where, you know, people would actually take turns and listen to each other. You know, sometimes you're in a big group like that, and everybody's just thinking about what they want to say next instead of actually kind of thinking. The other thing I loved was, while I got on there, or what I hadn't used the what do you call it, the Mattermost before. I mean, I think I'd heard of it, but I managed to log on, get approved, get an account, and get back on while they were still talking. Some distraction, but I loved seeing, you know, like, it's like Howard's course, you know, where we would all have these roles, and, you know, we'd all be supporting each other to get the information or the, you know, the discussion kind of documented. Does that make sense?
Great. So it's a little bit like Howard's course every week. Go for it. Go for it. Yeah, they have this great symbol as well. Pete's doing it. So, but yeah, it's a way to prevent interrupting each other. So, sorry, go for it, Pete. What were you gonna?
I was gonna say that's both a high compliment. We love Howard, and I think that's a reasonable way to. I've never thought of that before, but it's a good comparison. Yeah.
Okay, so but I think we see a kind of tension already even in this call between tools and people. Like, tools are great, but and Charlotte, if we could see the next, yeah, there we go. This is the largest brain map ever published. So I think we can see how this is also this thing living as an app or something like that.
Is this Jerry's or?
Yeah. So Jerry can show it, but like, I think maybe Jerry, while you're bringing it up, if that's okay, we can talk a little bit about this tension between tools and people, because I mean, we've got Mattermost, we've got StreamYard today, Zoom. Here's Jerry looking at COVID as well from a screenshot from before. But yeah,
let's talk about the tension. Let's talk about that tension before I screen share the brain, because once I put the brain up, it's going to be really distracting. I know I know that for a fact. But I will actually show you something in my brain that will go to what I'm saying. And OGM, Open Global Mind, starts as a kind of a geeky project to replace or enhance or convince this proprietary brain software to become more open, so that we can use it and other kinds of visualization tools to explain to each other what we believe, what we see, and to enter conversations where, you know, as you're saying, hey, I believe this, you can actually sort of see it. Think Tom Cruise in Minority Report, only maybe without the gloves and the hootie-hoo. And yet, one of our background beliefs is that emotion and membership trump logic most of the time. And so if I were to use the best visualization tools and present the crispest, most irrefutable argument to you, but accepting my argument meant you would be ostracized by your community, you would very happily deny my reality and say, nope, you're wrong. You know, next. And we're seeing that happening sort of live in politics these days. So we care as much about presencing, vulnerability, bridge building across others, otherizing, all those kinds of things. Those are really interesting and important to us. And people who just facilitate groups without any technology, we love those people as much as we love sort of geekness and trying to figure out how do we build sort of this mycelial network of what we know and how we know it.
Yeah,
we talked in. Oh, go for it, please, Charlotte.
Oh, sorry. Just one thing that occurred to me when I was there was that, I love geeking out and being really intellectual, distilling out wonderful, nuances at the edges of understanding. But, I couldn't imagine someone just from a regular person kind of coming in and saying, wow, I really want to be part of that. Or, I want to contribute, like, here's my experience, my life experience. Is that something that you're looking for, or is this just a different thing?
So I think, so we love communities and groups and initiatives that are doing like 6 people for dinner and, long table lunch conversations in Italian cities, or deliberative dialogue, or other places where normal people get together and share their lives. And we want to lather, rinse, repeat on that. Like, we want that to happen all over the world a lot. This particular conversation is a bit geekier, and it's about how do we instrument that? How do we remember that? How do we foster more of that? How do we harvest from those conversations the best ideas and represent them? So the OGM conversation is a little more specialized than just coming in and unburdening yourself about why you believe what you believe. So we're a little bit more meta. Pete, I don't know what you want to add to that.
Go ahead, Joe.
I was going to just say a quick thing. We were talking about you're talking about visualizing it, showing the arguments in the brain, and what you see behind Charlotte on her Zoom background is a drawing, right? So it's a sketch, and I think that there's something very technical about the brain. It's a technical tool, one of several that are available, and I wonder if the relationship between, you could have someone in the conversations in the Zoom room, live sketching, right? But it wouldn't have that ability, which you demonstrate often, and maybe we can do it at some point, of here it is. Here it is.
I just figured it feels like the right.
Let's do it. Let's do
moment to do that. Let me.
Okay, you ready? Ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody buckle in.
Yeah. Okay.
Buckle up.
Exactly, and I'll just do like a 2-minute what the hell is this kind of tour.
And we're gonna drop off, Joe, if that's okay. I'll just put it full screen.
Yeah. Great.
Cool. So this is a piece of software called The Brain. It's about 23 years old. It's a tiny company in Los Angeles that I've known since their birth because I was on their first press tour. So I was a tech industry analyst back then. I'm not a coder. I know enough to write hello world in about 20 different languages, and that's it. That's the end of my coding. But I saw this tool and started using it and started feeding it. So the file that you're looking at, this is a weird thing. The file that I'm showing you right now is the same file that I started 23 years ago. I don't have a second brain file. I don't create multiple files in this tool. So, for example, Peeragogy sort of comes out of the work of Howard Rheingold, whom we've talked about a little bit here. I just clicked on Howard, and he rotates into the middle. So in the brain display, in this version of the display, there's always some thought, because it's called the brain, in the middle. And then things connect to the active thought. Either they go up, they go down, or they go left. And notice that there's no link on the right. And you can use these up, down, left, right kind of links any way you feel like. It's up to you. The brain doesn't tell you how. So, for example, I have Howard married to Judy. He's an IFTF affiliate, and so are these other people. The IFTF is the Institute for the Future. And then as we go through, anywhere you see a little icon here, that means that I've attached a link to the web to that thought. So if I were to click right now, it will launch my browser to that URL, wherever it might be. And then down here across the bottom, you'll see that everything I've been clicking on is scrolling off toward the left. So I can go back to Peeragogy, for example, which we were just on, and then I can click on the Peeragogy handbook, for example. And here's the Peeragogy handbook on GitHub. So that's actually a link to the GitHub site. Joe, here's you. Charlotte, here's you. But all of this is under open content and a bunch of other things. And again, all the links you see here, I've been gardening, I've been curating for these 23 years. So this thing, one more really brief thing, just so you, and this might cause brains to explode, but Types of pedagogy. So there's contemplative pedagogy, critical pedagogy, indigenous pedagogy, all alongside peeragogy. But then when I go to types of learning, you'll see this explodes. There's expeditionary learning, experience-based learning, experiential learning, each of which click into, where did I learn about this? Oh, it's probably from the Kolb experiential learning model, which goes to David Kolb, who was a Case Western and invented learning style, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll stop sharing now, but in fact, I don't know how to stop sharing now because I'm not seeing the share window.
Yeah, when I used the brain briefly, mine just got completely tangled. You know, I don't know how. Do you find that you forget less stuff, or?
I find my memory, my onboard memory in the Brain Classic, the wet one that I have on board, it is really enhanced by this brain. And I don't feel like I've offloaded brain functions that I will then lose, that will be vestigial in my wet brain. I find that the act of putting things in my brain makes me remember them better. The act of finding them later and showing them to other people or looking at them myself refreshes those neural pathways. So my unaided recall on a bunch of stuff is better because of this. And when I come into conversations and I have this secret weapon of something I've obsessively done for 23 years and other people don't, I'm like, oh, please, 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 could we get to a place where we each can draw on these resources? And I'm not saying that everybody should go out and create one of these things. I'm saying that if we had 1% of the human population building variants of this in other kinds of tools that were available that people could seize and share, it would change how we talk and how we remember stuff. And that memory part is hugely important. Like, we're amnesic right now, which makes us very easy to spin by politicians, for example.
So, I was going to ask Pete if you could comment on, because I know you have a area of expertise in wikis. How would you describe the difference between what we just saw and a wiki? Is it different, or is it in tension with a wiki, or is it just another wiki that Jerry happens to access to this like weird 20-year-old graphical interface that looks really cool? Actually, what is it? What did we just see?
It's a great question, and there's some interesting comparisons between the brain and wikis. And I've been involved in wikis ever since I saw the brain, and wanted to do something similar, and decided that I wanted to have it in open content, rather than in a proprietary software. So literally, the brain is what got me started on wikis, and that's been a very fruitful avenue for me. The brain has a little bit of specific structure, and in that description, Jerry said you can use these directions any way you want. Jerry has a very specific way that he has used them. So he's got a very nicely structured knowledge graph. One of the things that's interesting about his brain is that if I compared it to a similar wiki, he's got page titles, essentially, but he doesn't have page content. So as he's driving through each of those links and narrating what it's about, he fleshes in the context and the content around it, just from his wet brain. So he's got a massive collection of links in the graph. It's huge, huger than most wikis, except maybe Wikipedia, maybe not. Wikis have more depth or more ability to represent different kinds of things. So a wiki can look like a lot like a book or an instruction manual or all about peeragogy. That's something that the brain doesn't do quite as well. Although we have a good friend, Mark Trexler, who's got something called the Climate Web in the same software. It looks a lot more like a book or an encyclopedia. They're similar.
Just to jump in here for a second, we have a few comments, Joe, if you're...
they're drifting in.
Yeah.
That's cool. Maybe, Charlotte, we bring up some of the nice images, because it would be nice to show some of these images of what it's like to be. I mean, I realize but I wanted to flip through. There's that. It looks like any Zoom call, but if we flip ahead a couple ones, there's the typical image. And then if we could go ahead a little bit more. So I don't know. This isn't specifically an OGM thing, but one could imagine that this is what that visual record looks like, right? So that there's a lot of recordings. And I know that OGM is keen to record these calls. And you mentioned before, we're recording things. Sort of there's a posterity, but there's also the sense that you can get a real-time record out of it and stuff like that. So, but the thing I wanted to say is just real quick is like, I can imagine because it is imagining it, all the people on all these calls having all these tools, whether it's the same tool or a different tool, going and forming this wonderful kind of storytelling mechanism or discussion mechanism. So is that where it's going? Please.
So let me tie a couple things together if I remember the stack.
Please.
And I'm sorry I can't participate on the chat from here, but I'm seeing the questions and they're awesome. And so Love Evolve is Charles Blass in Zurich, and he and Max Harper and a couple of other people have been mining our conversations and taking our transcripts. And basically, Max, for instance, is a programmer in Miro, and he's busy. He took one of our transcript sessions and then mapped visually, did a tracking of who was talking to whom and what that was like. It's totally different from what I showed you in the brain. Super interesting. And back to sort of the question you posed to Pete, one of the interesting questions here is, what is the relationship between a wiki and a brain and a Miro and Kumu and all these, how do these things, and Rome, there's like a cult of Rome right now, and a lot of people love backlinky, outlining tools. How do they talk to each other? How do we collaborate? Because each of these does different things really, really well, right?
That's been on Peeragogy. That's been one of the things that it's caused a little tension, because we get tracking on one tool, and then someone says, well, this is really great, and that makes everyone's brain explode.
Exactly.
My brain explodes.
I wanted to add one tiny little thing, which is metaphorically, I use a lot of nature metaphors to explain our process. And metaphorically, we're a little bit like leaf cutter ants, which most people don't know can't eat leaves. Like, why are leaf cutter ants up there chopping down leaves and taking them into the nest? They're doing that because there's a bunch of specialized ants from the same hive, which are in there chewing up the leaves, putting that on a fungus, basically curating a fungus. The fungus metabolizes the leaf matter and oozes a nectar that everybody eats. So metaphorically, I think a lot of us will be little termites or ants chewing up different parts of what we see and then putting them into a common infrastructure so that we can all feed society and civilization and culture off of this infrastructure, as opposed to each of these things being really different and separate and sort of siloed off and proprietary worse.
So I have a proprietary verse is exactly where I was going to go, but I wonder if we could go then into the next image, Charlotte, because this is I think OGM is often doing this reflection. By the way, that's a picture by Pete, which I absolutely love. It's a beautiful reflecting pool. But on the right is another thing that Pete installed. It's a Mattermost chat software, and I feel like OGM and the community around it is always kind of reflecting on itself and thinking about how to take itself forward, and that's great to have all these reflections. But like, I think I feel as though there's kind of a what next, and I think that the proprietary not so keen. This is I'm going to pull up this comment from Leo. We've heard of Rome research, but there's even there's such a thing as org Rome in Emacs. Some will have heard of that, which Leo's the co-maintainer, so he'll be happy I'm giving a shout out to that. But I use it for a lot. There's and that there's various other open source things besides that. So so where the open is even the first word in Open Global Mind. So
you guys were talking about Rome yesterday, right? Is that?
Somebody
mentioned it.
It's funny, Jerry, when you did that, it went the other way for me on my screen.
And I did that knowing fully that we're each in a different place in each other's displays, and it won't really mean anything. But the gesture was, over to you, Pete.
I'll move it.
Let's see. So interestingly enough, we bumped into something just not that long ago, but we've been talking about how all these tools fit together, how all this data fits together. We're working with the brain, both Jerry's brain and Mark's Climate Web, on getting the information out, and now what do we do with it? So what we've come to is an initiative I've got started just a few weeks ago called, I call it Massive Wiki. It's got a funny spelling, MASVF, massive. It stands for Markdown Shared Version Files. What I kind of realized, and Jerry's been a great co-explorer into this, and we're just at the very beginning of it. But we've got a few other folks, Charles and and especially Bill have been great co-explorers with us. We're exploring what if we don't concentrate on the tools so much, but rather the information. So, and especially if we make the information interoperable, if we start using Markdown, which is a very basic kind of lingua franca, it's not very complex, and make sure that we can share those Markdown files and that we can version them, then it's not so much anymore that Jerry has the brain, or that Pete has a stroll, or that Joe has an org roam. If we can kind of meet in the middle and share all of that in simple files, then we get this interoperability explosion and the ability to federate information around with each other. So there's a fair amount of technical heavy lift in adapting the tools of software development. It's actually software development that we're kind of inspired by, and Git and centralized Git hubs like GitHub or GitLab. But if we can kind of unlock that and unlock the ability for people to collaborate with information and knowledge in text and work out the kind of the social protocols of using different tools that speak the same language, and Git as an interoperation, synchronization, syndication protocol, where can we get to? So we're super excited about this, and this is the most active thing for me right now, and a number of the other geeks in OGM are on the hunt here.
Makes a lot of sense.
Quick. It's a little bit like the thing that we're going for, the vision that we're going for is very similar to Ward Cunningham's FedWiki, where he's got the idea that what you really want to do is not have a closed wiki, but you want to have a wiki that federates with a bunch of other people. So that part is very similar. I think what we're going for is a little bit more, for lack of a better kind of way to think about it, lowest common denominator. Where can we kind of meet in the middle and kind of make a mess, but also make a mess together, hopefully, and grow signal out of that.
So I would say that, just to quickly connect that with this image, this is the image from Howard. And if you read the fine print, which is impossible to read here, he's projecting a future 20 years in the future from the time of writing, in which there would be sort of a drug for everything. And I don't think that's quite come to pass, but maybe sort of. But what's really come to pass, I think, is that there's like a cyber drug for everything. There's a cyber kind of online community for everything. And these things kind of are, they are very much kind of a psychedelic experience, I think, getting into these different groups and different calls. So, but I think another thing Howard might say, here on the call, he might say, we've got to worry not just about the tools, but about the protocols. And that's a good way to move this towards closing, because one of the things we like to do at the end of each podcast is something we call project action review. We consider everyone who's on these podcasts as a contributor to the Peeragogy project. And one way we formalize that is by doing these kinds of reviews. So it's a variant of the after action review. But one could even imagine a kind of wiki shared amongst different projects which are reviewing their progress through this reflective thing. And that would be much less, like we were talking about the difference between titles and content. That would be a much lighter thing than the whole transcript of the whole thing, but sharing a review and sharing a sense of where we're going and the problems we're running into, like they do in Scrum Agile method. So anyway, there's up on the screen, meet.jit.c/Peeragogy. You can also follow up on jerrysbrain.com, openglobalmind.org, openglobalmind.com, and peeragogy.org. And yeah, if you're here on the live chat, I hope we'll see you in the meet.jit.c/Peeragogy in a minute. But yeah, go ahead.
I just as usual, we just scratched the surface. So I hope that we can make this a series, so maybe every 3 or 4 months we can have you guys back to talk about where it's going and kind of reflect back on what we talked about today and in the future.
Yeah, lots to talk about.
That would be lovely.
And we hope to have a bunch of progress in a couple of months, because we're sort of on the move. So things are good.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for having me and Lisa on yesterday. And thank you, Joe, for hosting. And we're going to wrap it up, but we'll see everybody on the PAR, the PAR as we call it, on Jitsi/Peeragogy.
Great.
See y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.